You're watching Public Comment every Thursdays at 8 a.m. The live stream. Detroit is different and Bridge Detroit. Local politics of Detroit. Welcome back to another episode of Public Comment. I am Khary Frazier of Detroit is Different, and here every Thursday we are delivering information about municipal politics of the city of Detroit. And with me, anchoring a lot of this, like really the premise for a lot of these discussions, just a piece of it, is a notebook you get from Bridge Detroit every week from the journalist, the writer with us. Malachi, how you doing today?
Great. I'm glad to be back in the D. We were up at the Mackinac Policy Conference last week where there was a debate for the mayoral candidates. Gave us kind of the first opportunity to see them really go head to head in a forum with some pretty high stakes. A lot of the executive class of the state is up there, even though it's really far away from the neighborhoods of the city. There's a lot of money that could be flowing to some of the candidates based on their performance there. But we managed to sit down with all of the candidates who were invited, and even one who was not invited but decided, I'm going to go up to Mackinac and campaign anyway. And so we've got those videos up online if you want to go to Bridge Detroit's YouTube channel. Obviously, we have been partnering on Detroit Next and interviewing candidates as well. So we're trying to give people these longer interviews, longer conversations where we dive more into the details, because that is the thing we keep hearing from voters, that they don't understand or they haven't heard really who has the plan for the city. And we're trying to figure that out more kind of step by step. But Mackinac, we're back here now. How much really changed up there on the island? That's something I'm trying to figure out as well. But I think we're going to talk about some new polling in this race, right?
Yeah, we're going to definitely talk a lot about the polls. So let's get talking about what's happening with these polls. So I'm closing and adding this.
So this came out this week from Lansing-based pollster Glenn Gariff Group, which is one of the premier, polling firms in Michigan. Pretty well trusted. It was commissioned by the Detroit News and WDIV TV, and DIV is doing a debate later this month. So they use that poll to help kind of determine who they would be. Well,
welcome to the debate.
Yep.
And as you see, some of the information poll contacted 500 likely primary voters May 27th through the 29th, mostly through cell phone, basically like 4.5 margin of error. And we see the race, and let's kind of bounce through some of the candidates. Leading, as we know, Mary Sheffield. But before we even talk Mary Sheffield, really, 22% undecided. 22% undecided. That's a huge number when we really think about, like, these are likely voters. And we already are aware of so many people that have been disengaged, meaning like the apathetic voter that already exists in Detroit. And now we add in a lot of undecided voters. As a Detroit Next episode had Karen Dumas, and we're running some clips about that. A lot is still kind of up in the air. What's been the take of the engagement in today's episode is more about, like, what we're hearing, how people are talking. The conversations aren't necessarily as succinct. There are some people just like their heels are dug in for who the candidate they want, but it's a lot of people that are like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Mary Sheffield, the council president, and Solomon Kinloch, the Reverend of Triumph Church, have been kind of the two, top dogs assumed in this race from the beginning. Polls have kind of continued to reaffirm that Sheffield is out ahead of the other candidates by a fairly good margin. In this poll, she had about 38% of the vote, which was the largest share that she's had in the three polls that we've had so far. So she basically started at 34% when the first poll was done in February. And these are all by different agencies. So again, take these numbers, the specific numbers, with a bit of a grain of salt, but this is kind of a general sense. Mary Sheffield has about a third of the electorate, but that went from 34% to 32% to 38% in this latest poll. So her support has grown a little bit if you take these numbers as gospel. And Kinloch's numbers started out pretty small before he really got in the race at 5%. And then it jumped up to about a quarter in the last poll, and now he's back to about 14%. And again, I want to be kind of careful about Did he do something that shaved off 10 percentage points, in the last couple of weeks?
Knows?
Probably not. This is not, a scientific endeavor here. But one thing that I do with those caveats think is kind of interesting is we've seen a decline in James Craig's support over the course of these 3 polls. He started at 20%, dropped down to 19, and then was 9% in the latest poll. And I think that is interesting because I have heard anecdotally from a lot of folks who feel that the more he's got out in front of people, the less impressed folks have been with him. I think, a lot of that 20% that he started with was a reflection of the name recognition that he has across the city by being the former police chief, second longest serving chief. People really know who he is. But there was always some high unfavorability numbers that were attached to him in some of the polls that were done too.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've heard a lot of criticism about his debate performance up on Mackinac Island and that he didn't have a great showing. But he's going to draw a significant number of voters, I think either way, just based on that name recognition. And, Jenkins is also hanging in there. She was polling at 8% here. So the real question for me is who takes that number 2 spot? This is a nonpartisan race. The top 2 vote getters basically move on to a runoff in the general election. So if you really take these numbers as gospel, then Sheffield has a pretty good chance of making it out. Who's going to be that number 2 person? With 22% undecided, can have a big swing depending on where those voters end up going. And maybe we can talk a little bit about why people are undecided and kind of what we've been hearing from folks. But for me, I guess the real takeaways are, one, it kind of reaffirms that Mary is out, in front of everyone as the front runner. It's really kind of a battle for who's going to face her in the general election. And 2, there's any number, 3, maybe 4 candidates who could be in that spot, depending on whether they can pick up these undecided voters. But again, there's kind of a limited amount of time. Killock is going up on TV with some ads soon. His campaign is very confident that they have the financial resources that nobody else has access to and a ground game. And when I say ground game, I mean like they're out knocking on doors. They have, they're engaging voters one-on-one. Killock has been noticeably absent from a lot of these forums, and that's an intentional strategy. He told me up on Mackinac that the idea is we're going to go meet people out where they are. We're not going to, waste time basically doing these forums. And, I think they have been somewhat useful, but also I kind of understand where he's coming from a little bit because we hear a lot of the same things from forum to forum. So if you're really spending the time to invest, as a voter to show up to these things, maybe you're not hearing what you want to hear in terms of like specificity. But I don't know. What do you think about that?
Okay, a couple of different things. So first off, as we think of forums, less I think is more so if voters are hearing the same information, because there are some people that are signing up and going to many of them, like sporting events, but most of these forums are hosted in collaboration by different groups. So by not showing up to the forum, in some ways you're kind of, possibly already causing some tensions. As I've been in Detroit my whole life, and you'd be surprised how that invite that was not welcome from this community group, from that politician, and then something else goes left, it just has people kind of have a bad taste in their mouth. Sometimes not even from the organization's leadership. It's just the people that support the organization. So, soon I plan on doing something. I want to do more like a meet and greet, because it is a 501c3 organization I'm associated with Hope Village Revitalization and their farmers market. I want to do that July 9th with a lot of the candidates in District 5 and also mayoral candidates, also city clerk candidates, and the police commission in District 5 too. But we'll see who comes and who doesn't come. But I just know from being in community, people will say, oh, they didn't want to come to that. And then, then you don't want to have one of the big things that we care about in in Hope Village, specifically in District 5, is a lot of the truck routes, because there's new industrial development in our community, and those truck routes we know can put a lot of weight on the grounds here. A lot of weight on the grounds here breaks up a lot of ground. So things like that. And then, one vote goes left or right or wherever it goes. And now people are like, they never liked us, so you run that risk. So I think you have to be mindful. And some of these groups are so it can be across different borders. It could be like a union group, it could be retiree group, it could be like it could be a collaboration of different agencies or organizations. So some of the risk you get is tough, but then also being present and showing up all the time, it could possibly, take away from pounding that pavement, meeting a person in the streets. I don't necessarily know what's right or what's wrong. I just know the experience and how people feel. And what I'm hearing from a lot of people from the last forum where we went to was the forum, the NBN forum, which I think now it's almost becoming like famous and infamous of like what was happening with hosted by Charlie LaDuff, Jamie, Charlie LaDuff and Karen Dumas, and we were there, just the relationship with Karen Dumas, and it was a lot of it. It was a lot of things. You know what I'm saying? It had a lot of energy of the people, and even from our response and videos. There were some waves of people feeling as though I like these answers, I like this candidate, but nothing necessarily concrete. Walking away as this is a very interesting election. Let's just put it like that.
I think, generally it's, in my personal opinion, Malachi Barrett, the person, is saying, I feel like candidates should be showing up forums for a basic kind of transparency and participation in democracy and engaging with voters. Like, I think it's important that they do that. I kind of get, when there have been so many of them, how do you pick and choose? The events are often, tied to endorsement decisions by the individual organizations that are putting them on. So there is like a real like campaign political reason to be there, that you perform well and maybe you get the endorsement of these groups. But also that's, I've heard some kind of cynical feelings that these groups already have their mind made up anyway. And so how productive are they? I don't know. I'm not going to make a judgment on that one way or another. So yeah, I mean, I think I have heard definitely from folks who have noticed that Kinloch has not attended these forums, and they're saying, what is he doing? Is he hiding from voters? Is he, not want to make a mistake in front of people? Is the campaign like protecting him? And I think those are all, pretty valid questions, but it seems to be more that they don't feel that those are good vehicles to engage voters so much as going out and like talking to them one-on-one. I think comparing candidates up on a stage and having them have to like answer questions one in a row or, bounce things off, or, the debates, we're going to have more debates. I think this is all like an important part of the process.
Mm-hmm.
But I can understand some of the frustrations about like, well, this process isn't really like helped voters better understand who they're going to support. I mean, I'm open to that criticism too.
I definitely think that. And I urge everyone to check out Detroit Next. Detroit Next is giving a lot of insight into perspectives and specific questions of how a person sees executing what this mayoral role will be. Thus far, we haven't gotten into a lot of council candidates. I'd imagine probably after the primary, and it's not as many, but Bridge Detroit is leading a series of different district discussions throughout different districts. I believe District 4 is coming up next for Bridge Detroit. And kind of back to the mayor discussion and all of this, trying to make it all make sense. The other elephant in the room is we kind of don't really know where we're at as Detroit itself. People have witnessed under the 3 administrations of Mayor Mike Duggan definitely, I like how Karen Dumas put it in her Detroit Next, a change in perception of Detroit, Michigan, and what's happened in Detroit. With that, it's still a lot of people that have a lot of questions about what Detroit is doing for them per se, and like how is it engaging. And with that being said, not to make that whole, neighborhoods versus downtown discussion again per se, but I think voters are also kind of aware that like Black leadership coming in is going to be different, especially with what's happening federally right now. And also, we kind of don't know what's happening in the state with the gubernatorial race next year. Voters are, I think, a little bit aware that like the next person can't walk in and carry on what Mike Duggan wants to do or is doing right now, not wants to do, but what the Duggan administration has done, because things are going to be so different. And a lot of the plans have like a lot of the discussions from a lot of the candidates thus far. I don't think anybody definitely has, no one has really slammed the Duggan administration. Um, and
about as close as we got to that is Kinloch saying basically that the kind of political establishment at large has not addressed a lot of the problem, and that's him running as like an outsider candidate, saying you need somebody from outside the government,
help,
which is what you do when you don't have a lot of political experience. Like that kind of all makes sense on paper as like a strategy, but he is very quick to say that doesn't include Duggan. He's a fan of the work that Duggan does.
And that is the tough thing, I think, about it, because it's media plays a role in this too, and media has definitely embraced a lot of what has happened in the Duggan administration. So like it's tough because everyone is kind of saying like, hey, I'm gonna kind of carry what has been done and build upon it. And for some of the voters, it's just tough to think like, how are they going to exactly like carry upon and build upon what has been developed under this Duggan administration, when it's a lot of Detroiters that feel as though they weren't necessarily a part of what has been developed and carried on and moved forward in the Duggan administration too. So that's where like I don't, you know, it becomes like more of like a personality thing, and we don't know what's going to be in store for who's going to be in that office. And this is Khary Frazier speaking. Like I really am I really think that it's like, you know what I'm saying? Like if this was like a basketball team and I'm scouting or whatever, you know, it's almost like you're, you know, the playoffs are just happening. You know what I'm saying? So like you don't know the team that you're going to play.
Yeah. I think, you know, we have been covering this for like all of this year. So I think I have to constantly kind of remind myself that like it's the start of June. People are going out and have summer plans and like getting ready to hang out for like a great summer, and are not necessarily tuned in on politics right now. And they are starting to kind of get tuned in because that August 5th primary is coming up. But you know, I think there's a lot of folks that are just starting to get kind of engaged in this for the first time, and kind of right in time for some of these actual debates to start happening. So I don't know. I think if we see another poll in about a month that shows there's, you know, the number of undecided voters hasn't really changed that much, that will be very interesting to me. I think that the campaigns are, you know, using every opportunity they can to try to win those folks over. What do they want to hear is an interesting question. I mean, when we talk to voters about, you know, what is your top issue on, you know, what is your top issue in this race? And they give a variety of answers.
Yep.
You know, but, you know, mostly it comes down to like public safety, education, you know, housing, you know, investing in neighborhoods, things like that. Is there another one that really
I would say,
yeah,
it definitely that education is brought up often, public safety is brought up often, housing is brought up often, and then it's like offshoots of all of that. Like, and then here's the other one that a lot of voters, you can say, are paying attention at some of these forums. Like, what revenue will the city be able to get? They're aware that we're gonna not have as much revenue, as that's the talking point too. So like, it's like, hey, I want to keep everything the same, even though I know all of these things will change. You know what I'm saying?
Well, it's like, I think the people bringing up revenue is like a good indicator that like people are informed and they're like pretty engaged, but they're not hearing what they want to hear from candidates that will like make their mind up. You know what I mean? Like they know what they want to hear, but they're not hearing it right now. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. And then also part of it is, I think the candidates themselves are just like a lot of us. It's like, what will they be in store for when they step in? You know, I know that from the Detroit Next with Mary Sheffield and the Detroit Next with Fred Durhal being in government right now, like their perspectives on like where things are and where they stand, obviously it'll look a lot different than when Sontil Jenkins was on for Detroit Next, and also when Solomon Kinloch was on for Detroit Next. Like these all play a role, or even James Craig's, which will be coming up very soon. It's it's a key awareness where I think people are paying attention. I like what you're saying. They know what they want to hear, but I don't even know how feasible some of what we want would be. So that's back to the root of a lot of these Detroit issues. It's going to be scarcity of resources to make these decisions. So what decisions do you want to make and who will make them? It will be very key. So with that, I definitely even think this episode is also going to leave people just as with a little bit more information, but necessarily you're not about to run out of here and say, oh, I'm voting for this person per se.
I would say that, that has been the mission of our Detroit Next podcast series, to like have those deep conversations. And we're nearing the end of our first conversation with all of the candidates. And I'm hoping that we can do more, in the next, like I said, like month and a half, basically, before absentee ballots go out, to provide more of that context for folks. But I do think that information is out there if you can find it. But I also do understand why people are still kind of on the fence. Do you have a sense of who might be able to pick some of that up? I just want to kind of leave off on that before we wrap up.
On the undecided, I definitely think that there are some wonderful concepts and ideas that I've heard, and I'm not like belittling them by calling them that, but it's some unique and creative concepts that I've heard from many of the candidates. I think that I really don't even, this is another, I think, beautiful thing. A lot of the candidates in this race are people that have that passion for the city, and I think clearly really want to be in that role. I don't think they're necessarily looking at it for usury or anything like that. So that's good. I think that that's very positive. It's just more so how they're going to do it. So I would say that moving forward, we're going to see a lot of people engaged. We're going to see a lot of pounding the pavement. I'm going to be paying attention to lawn signs, and more so than lawn signs, I'm going to be really paying attention to like the feedback from what the people are thinking. So if whoever can deliver that message on what is most reasonable and feasible, that's what's going to connect best. The tough thing about reasonable and feasible is that's not the sexiest thing for what voters usually want to hear, but that I think is going to anchor, and they're going to have to say, this is why this is our plan, and this is how this is going to be our plan. It's not going to be, the bells and whistles in the gold city that you're thinking, but this is really what I can guarantee and I can sustain.
And I'll say, if you have thoughts on this, if you either are really gung-ho about a candidate or you're still on the fence, I would need to hear more from voters about this. I need to spend some more time talking to people. So please reach out to me. My email address is mbarrett@bridgedetroit.com. And you can find all of our work at bridgedetroit.com. It's free. The city council notebook goes out every week, and that is kind of feeding the conversations that we have here. But check out Detroit Next on YouTube and your podcast platforms as well for those interviews with candidates, and just keep up with us, because we're doing our best to try to get you some information so you can make up your mind.
Yeah, most definitely. Detroit is different. We're going to be doing a lot of different things as coming up, and talking not just Detroit Next, but candidates on Detroit is Different. I've interviewed Fred Durrell and Jonathan Barlow. Santos Jenkins' interview is going to be posted today on Detroit is Different, which, if you ever watch Detroit is Different, it's a deep dive into like a person's relationship with the city of Detroit. I love that. And actually, Malachi will be coming on soon too. So stay tuned for that.
That's going to be fun. I'm going to be in the hot seat.
With that being said, we will see you next week. Peace. You're watching Public Comment every Thursdays at 8 a.m. The live stream. Detroit is Different in Bridge Detroit. Local politics of Detroit.